The kitchen was clean, except for the apron, and the smell of death. Welcome to Candle Clue. I am your host, Arvela. Let's grow this mystery-loving circle. Comment below and share where you're watching from. I truly appreciate every message you send. Here we go. I've never been one to assign moral value to the scent of oregano. Basil, maybe too cheerful for funeral parlors, but oregano is neutral. It minds its own business. So when a well-used butcher's apron that reeked of the stuff showed up at our door at 10:30 on a Tuesday morning, carried by a woman who looked like she had opinions about everything except herself, I knew two things. 1, my day wasn't going to involve steak. 2, Nero Wolfe was not going to like this. The woman, pale, mid-40s, with dark eyes and that clipped efficient look women get when they run businesses with too many relatives involved, held the apron in a sealed plastic bag, like it was a murder weapon. She said her name was Marlene Fuchs, co-owner of Fuchs & Sons Delicatessen, and she said it like the name had once meant something noble, then been dragged through 20 years of pastrami and sibling rivalries. "Mr. Wolfe," she said as I ushered her into the office, "I need to know if this smells like death." Now, if you've never seen Wolfe react to a sentence like that before lunch, let me draw you a picture. One arched brow, both lips pressed into a border skirmish, and the kind of glacial silence that makes you wonder if you've just committed a philosophical crime. Wolfe, in his oversized throne behind the desk, glanced at me. That meant, "Is this woman insane? And why have you brought her here?" "She has a mystery, sir," I said, "involving meat." That got him halfway to mildly interested. Wolfe had, on occasion, tolerated protein-based puzzles. "I run the deli," Marlene said, her voice crisp, her bag still hovering. "My brother, Neil, was found unconscious yesterday in our kitchen, face down near the prep station. He's alive, but he's not speaking. The only thing he touched, far as we can tell, was this apron. It doesn't belong to him. It wasn't there before, and it reeks of something I can't name." Wolfe closed his eyes. "Not in sleep, not yet. That was reserved for the sins of the afternoon. But in concentration, or resistance. You brought it here," he said at last. "To what?" "Have me sniff it." "To have someone who understands danger sniff it," she replied evenly. I offered to take the bag. She didn't hand it over right away. "My other brother, Eli, said to forget it, that Neil probably passed out from stress. That's what everyone says when something goes wrong at the deli stress, but I know when something smells wrong." Wolfe opened one eye. "Miss Fuchs, you are, to my regret, not a client. You are a carrier of a dubious item and an inconvenient theory. This is not a public counter for the weighing of paranoia." "Then weigh this," she said, setting the plastic bag carefully on the edge of his desk. She didn't push it, just placed it like a curse. Wolfe leaned back further. "If such a feat were possible without medical equipment, Archie." "Yep. Remove that from my desk. Open it in the front room." Gently, I took the bag, holding it like it might whisper something unholy into my ear. In the hall, I cracked the seal. The scent that met me wasn't oregano, not entirely. It was deeper, older, like moldy thyme, rotting celery, and something metallic that reminded me of sick rooms from my army days. I brought it back. Wolfe hadn't moved. Marlene Fuchs was standing now, her hands clasped in front of her like she was stealing for confession. "Describe your relationship with your brother," Wolfe said. She blinked. "Neil? He's a perfectionist. My older brother runs the slicing line, does inventory, always talks about quality. Never married. Still lives with our mother upstairs. And Eli?" Her jaw tightened. "He owns the lease, manages the books, thinks everything should be franchised. He hates that we still grind our own spices, thinks authenticity is a liability." "And your role?" "I run the front. I hire fire and make sure the food doesn't taste like a gas station." I nodded. "The matriarch still in the picture?" "She's 92 and meaner than vinegar. But yes, she's upstairs." Wolfe made a low sound. half human, half grunt. Your deli is a triangle with 4 corners, a charming impossibility. Why not go to the police? They'd laugh me out the door. No crime, just a bad smell, and a brother in a coma. Wolfe opened his eyes, both of them this time. Have you been threatened? I got a note in my coat pocket 2 weeks ago. No signature, just a line from Ecclesiastes. Which line? The dead know nothing, and they have no more reward. Archie's ruled on 14. Any time a woman quotes Ecclesiastes and drops off a poisoned apron, your morning's gone off the rails. Wolfe said nothing for a long while. Then leave the apron. Go home. Tell no one you came here. Mr. Goodwin will visit your establishment tomorrow morning. She didn't flinch. You'll take the case. I will consider your position. Archie will evaluate its merit. She left in a click of heels and nerves. I watched her walk down the stoop through the front window. Do you believe her? I asked. No, Wolfe said, reaching for his beer. But I believe the apron. And with that, the most fastidious man in New York declared war on a deli. I spent the next 10 minutes wondering what kind of spice mix could knock a man off his feet and still leave his pulse ticking. Wolfe didn't offer theories. He was busy closing his eyes and pretending the apron didn't exist while I stood in the front room with it, double-bagged in plastic and sealed like biohazard leftovers. I know better than to ask questions when Wolfe goes quiet. That's his sacred right. Thinking without interference. The rest of us just orbit until he's ready to speak. At noon, Fritz came up from the kitchen to announce that lunch would be late, because he was now disinfecting everything. I gave him the short version about a mysterious apron that could fell a bull. Fritz, with his eternal culinary reverence, muttered something about desecration and went back down, presumably to boil all the air in the pantry. By 1, Wolfe summoned me to the office with a grunt that translated roughly to, "You may now speak." I walked in, sat down opposite him, and gave the room a quick scan for any signs of mood, sulking, resistance, curiosity. I saw the usual calm mountain, arms resting on his belly, fingers laced, eyes slightly lidded. Well, I said, "You're taking this one seriously, I gather." He didn't move. Describe the scent again. Like if you buried oregano in a rusty basement and let it ferment with celery salt. Add a touch of fear. It's not just bad, it's wrong. Something chemical maybe, but not industrial. Organic rot. You sound theatrical. You should smell it. He nodded faintly. Tomorrow morning, you will go to the delicatessen. Do not call ahead. Charming surprise visits. Always the best way to get deli owners to open up. You want me to chat up the brothers? I want you to observe them. Interact, minimally. Note the customers, the layout, the staff, particularly the spice preparation area. Because that's where this horror apron came from. Because it is the only part of the store that Nero Wolfe would have approached voluntarily. If it was tampered with, he would not have hesitated to use it. And the verse from Ecclesiastes, a flourish. It suggests either guilt or performance. Possibly both. He closed his eyes again, which in Wolfe terms meant the conversation was now a whisper in history. The next morning, I put on my friendliest shirt and left the brownstone at 9. The address for Fuchs & Sons was down on East 74th, a sturdy old corner building wedged between a vegan gelato place and a boarded-up bookstore that probably died of Twitter. The deli itself had the feel of old Gotham commerce, polished brass, tiled floors, photos of the founding patriarch in black and white. The kind of place you respect even if you're not hungry. Inside, the place was running like clockwork. 2 young guys worked the counter with slicing precision. A stocky man with a clipboard, mid-50s, gold chain, mustache trimmed like he respected geometry, was barking prices and correcting labels. I pegged him instantly. "Eli Fuchs?" I asked. He looked up, suspicious but used to strangers. "Who's asking?" "Archie Goodwin. I was recommended here for the pastrami, and for a bit of insight." He narrowed his eyes. "Insight?" I nodded at the spice bins behind the counter. "You grind in-house, right?" He grunted. "We do everything in-house. That's our curse. Some people would call that integrity." He looked at me again, harder. You here because of Neil? I offered my best sincere expression. I heard something happened. Some people worry when a man goes quiet overnight. His expression cracked. Not wide, but enough. Neil had a bad spell. He's resting. Doctor says no stroke, no poison. Just exhaustion. Man hasn't taken a vacation in 20 years. Figures. But he passed out in the middle of prep, right? That's what they're saying. I wasn't here. I got here later. He was already at St. Vincent's. Anyone see what happened? Just Rudy, the night kid. Said Neil was checking the paprika shelf and fell. I told him to stop making up drama. Is Rudy in? Nope, weekends only. Look, Marlene put you up to this? I didn't say that. He leaned in, dropping his voice. My sister thinks there's a plot every time the pickles ferment too fast. Neil just works too hard. She's always been the anxious one. I've heard otherwise. Word is you're the expansionist. She's the preservationist. He blinked. And what's that supposed to mean? It means she likes the way things are. You like franchising. He looked at me for a long second, then chuckled. You're one of those guys, private eyes. My guess, she paid you, didn't tell you the full story, and now you're sniffing around for drama. No drama yet, I said, but the spice bins do smell alive. I made a slow lap around the interior. The spice shelf was surprisingly pristine, each glass jar labeled in perfect calligraphy. I noted a few strange additions: fenugreek, sumac, even as saffetida. Not your average pastrami fare. In the back, a thin woman with a ponytail was stirring something in a silver bowl. She looked up as I approached. You the spice mixer? I asked. I do prep, she said. Grinding, folding, roasting. Was Neil a good boss? He was fine. Quiet, liked his precision. Did he have enemies? She snorted. In this place? Only relatives. I liked her already. On my way out, I took a slow glance at the trash bins, the back alley, and the delivery logs. Nothing jumped out except that Neil's apron, if it had indeed been the contaminated one, wasn't logged as removed or replaced. Odd for a place that took inventory of toothpicks. Back at the brownstone by noon, I found Wolfe mid-orchid session. I waited, quietly, as he spritzed his Cattleya hybrids with the attention most men reserve for godchildren. When he was done, he returned to the office and gestured. Report. I gave him the rundown. Eli's dismissiveness, the young woman's sarcasm, the oddly expansive spice collection. No anomalies. Wolfe asked. Just one. Neil's apron wasn't logged in any supply sheets. And Marlene's story checks. He fell near the spice area. Nobody seems to know who was there 5 minutes before. He nodded. Call Saul Panzer. Already. If there has been sabotage, it was internal. Saul will interview the supplier and verify if any unusual orders were placed. You will obtain a list of all employee shifts for the last 2 weeks. And the verse. He held up a finger. Later, I rose, paused at the door. You think this was an attack? I think someone wanted Neil Fuchs incapacitated. And I think they chose a method meant to resemble accident or collapse. Something subtle. Something family would overlook. Except Marlene. Why her? Wolfe lifted his eyes to mine. Because she believed the apron was the message. And just like that, the case had teeth. By the time I had Saul Panzer on the line, the usual Thursday rhythm of the brownstone was already fraying. Fritz was refusing to make lunch until Wolfe promised the apron had been quarantined. Wolfe, in return, refused to use the word quarantine, declaring it hysterical and imprecise. I stayed out of the kitchen and out of that argument, dialing Saul from the hallway extension. You free? I asked. Saul didn't bother with pleasantries. Job? Yay. Deli on East 74th, Fuchs & Sons. I need a quiet check on their spice deliveries. Names, frequencies, any irregularities. Also find out if anyone special's been asking questions about Neil Fuchs. Is he the one in the hospital? That's the one. What's the angle? There's an apron involved. Say no more, he said, dry as a cracked bagel. I'll call by 5. Wolfe heard all of this through the thin office door and grunted his approval as I came in. I gave him the list of shifts I'd sweet-talked out of the deli's back office, a photocopied week planner scribbled with names and symbols that might have made sense if you were part of the family. Wolfe examined it like he was reading Latin inscriptions off a tomb wall. Here, he said, pointing. Note the overlap. I leaned in. He tapped a name. M. Fuchs, on a Thursday evening, then again on the following Monday morning. She does not usually work both ends of the weekend. Perhaps she insisted, or perhaps she was scheduled deliberately to keep her away from something, to guarantee her absence during the incident with Neil. That was Wolfe for you. 5 names on a piece of paper and he was already charting motive graphs. I leaned against the desk. You think someone set this up to make it look like Neil collapsed naturally? I think the scent was chosen for plausibility. You reported fermentation, rot, and metal. If someone tampered with a blend, mild mold spores, a trace of blood or iron oxide, it would be undetectable by standard tests, unless someone thought to ask, and no one would unless they believed the spice was the method. He nodded slowly. Correct. I still say the apron's the message, not just the means. You're warming to the idea. Good. By 4:30, Saul called back. Got your list? Shoot. Main suppliers Golden Harvest Spices, up in Yonkers, weekly deliveries, no flag changes, but one private order went through 6 days ago. Rush delivery, hand-signed by Eli Fuchs. Rush spice? Yup, 10 pounds of custom-blended garam masala. The warehouse thought it was odd, said the deli never orders masala, not in bulk. My gut twisted slightly. Did it match the stuff I described? They said it had a strong metallic scent. One of their mixers flagged it as off, but it passed the checklist. Might have been intentional. You think it was tampered with? Could be. Or over-roasted. Or it reacted to one of the fresh components in the deli. Where's the batch now? Half of it was delivered. The other half still sitting in the back room at Fuchs & Sons, waiting for signature. That told me 2 things. 1. Eli had ordered something no one else knew about. 2. Whatever he'd planned wasn't done yet. Wolfe listened to the full report, eyes closed, hands steepled. Then he said, You will return tomorrow. Speak to Marlene. Ask what Neil was scheduled to prepare that morning. You think it involved the masala. I think the masala was bait, and the apron was the hook. He turned to me, opened his eyes, and added almost lazily, Do not let Eli know you are asking. Subtlety is my strong suit. That is debatable. I returned to the deli the next day with a tighter smile and looser shoulders. Marlene met me in the alley behind the building, her hair pulled back and her jaw set like a woman ready to walk through fire barefoot. You believe me now? She asked. I believe something's cooking, and it ain't corned beef. She led me through the back door, past crates of pickled cabbage and the distinct odor of fryer oil. Inside the prep kitchen, I could see the silver spice mixer Wolfe had been so curious about. It stood like a small concrete mixer, rotating slowly. The smell coming off it was pungent, but clean. Neil was scheduled to make the winter roast rub. Marlene said, It's our blend. Clove, fennel, chili flake, a pinch of mace. We sell it in jars during the cold months. Would that mix normally include masala? Never. That's Indian. We're German Jewish. No one here uses garam masala unless they're experimenting. Did Neil experiment? She hesitated. Only when he was angry. I blinked. Angry? Yeah. He'd try new things when Eli made a marketing move without asking. Neil thought the food should never change. Eli wanted seasonal crossovers. Neil called them gimmicks. So Eli orders a surprise shipment of masala. Neil finds it, maybe uses it in protest. Ends up collapsed. Her eyes flashed. You think Eli poisoned him? I think someone knew Neil couldn't resist making a point. She folded her arms. We found something else, behind the spice shelf. I was cleaning after you left. She handed me a clear envelope. Inside was a slip of paper, yellowed and folded, typed, not handwritten. It read, "Let the meat turn bitter, and the tongue will forget its origin." I held it up to the light. No watermark, no signature, no date. Who found it? I asked. Goethe, the prep cook. You trust her. She trusts Neil. That's enough. I left the deli, with the note in my breast pocket, and an itch that wouldn't go away. Wolfe didn't like messages. He liked actions. But when someone starts quoting cryptic metaphors about bitterness and forgetting, they aren't just trying to hurt somebody, they're rewriting a memory. Back at the brownstone, I handed Wolfe the slip. He read it once, frowned. Biblical again. No citation this time. He looked up at me. A fabricated proverb, designed to seem ancient. Guilt by poetry. Precisely. So what now? He sat up straighter, which in Wolf speak meant war footing. Now, we invite the family. All of them. All who matter. Marlene, Eli, and Goethe. Not Neil. Neil will remain silent for now. But he has already spoken. How? Wolfe gestured toward the note, the apron, and the scent still lingering in the hallway. He left a trail. Our job is to interpret it before someone tries to sweep it away. I nodded, already hearing the echo of Wolfe's voice in the office that would follow, when he'd line them up like chess pieces and move them one by one across the board. Tomorrow night, then? I asked. 7 p.m. Tell Fritz to prepare extra coffee. There will be resistance. I smiled. There always is. And that's how the brownstone braced for a delicatessen war, fought not with knives, but with spices, family secrets, and a man too proud to collapse without leaving a trail. It was precisely 6:58 p.m. when Marlene arrived at the brownstone, punctual in a way that told you she'd never been late to anything that mattered. She wore a gray wool coat and shoes meant for standing 10 hours behind a counter. Fritz led her to the office with the same caution he used when handling raw eggs. I'd already prepped the chairs, one at 12 o'clock for Wolfe, the rest in a neat crescent, with just enough space between to encourage defensiveness. Eli arrived, 2 minutes later, wearing a camel overcoat, a frown, and the faintest scent of garlic. He shook Fritz's hand like it owed him money, and gave me a once-over like I was the waiter at a bad business lunch. Then came Goethe, the quiet prep cook, her eyes darting from wood panel to carpet as if she was waiting for someone to tell her she didn't belong here. Wolfe, of course, hadn't moved. He was nestled in his throne, arms folded over his stomach, gaze fixed on nothing and everything. "Thank you for coming," I said. "Please be seated. Please." They sat. Eli crossed one ankle over his knee. Marlene adjusted her coat but left it on, like armor. Goethe chose the edge of her seat, ready to spring. Wolfe didn't speak immediately. That was his trick. Let the silence bloom until someone tried to fill it with something useful or stupid. Tonight, Eli went first. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "I agreed to this because my sister insisted, but I still don't understand what you think you're investigating." "Neil had a fainting spell, that's a family matter." "No," Wolfe said. "That was a message." Eli blinked. "Excuse me? You are here, Mr. Fuchs, because someone used a spice blend as a weapon. Neil Fuchs collapsed after contact with an apron containing trace compounds, your supplier described as atypical and metallic. Furthermore, you, acting unilaterally, ordered a bulk shipment of garam masala 1 week ago. That shipment was neither catalogued nor explained. I managed the inventory," Eli said quickly. "It was for a seasonal experiment." "Yes. A departure from your usual profile, unannounced. And conveniently untraceable. That's a stretch." Wolfe's voice didn't rise. "Let us not insult the room. I don't need motive, I need logic. And the logic here is inexorable. You introduced an unknown compound into the work environment without disclosing it. Days later, your brother, who objected to your marketing tactics, collapsed. The causality may be circumstantial, But it is not coincidental. Eli's eyes narrowed. So you think I tried to poison my own brother? No, Wolfe said simply. I think someone tried to silence him. Marlene shifted in her seat. Neil never kept quiet unless he meant to. He was going to file a complaint. Not just about the spices, about the books. Eli stiffened. That's a lie. It's not, she said. He told me last week he found a gap, a payment for $10,000 that didn't go to any supplier. No invoice, just a note. Community expansion. Eli opened his mouth, closed it, then reached for his coat. This is nonsense. You will sit, Wolfe said. Not loud, but final. Eli sat. Goethe spoke next, her voice barely audible. Neil was upset that morning. He said someone was revising the truth. I didn't ask. I just went to scrub the floor. Did he mention the apron? I asked. No. But he put on a different one than usual. It had no name tag. He said it didn't matter. Wolfe leaned forward just enough to make the room lean with him. You, Miss Goethe, found a note behind the spice shelf. You gave it to Marlene. Yes. Was anyone else present? No. I was the only one on morning prep. And you are aware of the implications of a message left behind a shelf that only a handful of employees access. She nodded. Wolfe shifted his attention to Marlene. You said your mother lives upstairs. She does. Does she still take meals from the kitchen? Marlene looked confused. Sometimes, but lately she's been withdrawn. Says we've spoiled the food. That phrase again, Wolfe murmured. Spoiled. He turned his gaze on Eli like a beam. Who handles your bookkeeping? I do, Eli said. Exclusively. Yes. Why? Because the books are going to reveal more than inventory gaps. They will show purchase orders misclassified as infrastructure expenses. They will show unapproved renovations on properties the deli does not own. And they will show that Neil knew it. Eli's jaw clenched. You're bluffing. No, Wolfe said. I am positioning. The room fell into silence again, but now it crackled with something alive. Archie ruled N23. When Wolfe says he's positioning, it means he already knows more than you do. If you talk, you'll confirm it. If you lie, he'll let you hang yourself with the rope you volunteer. I stepped forward. Eli, here's what I think happened. You ordered that masala to create a reason for Neil to get curious. You knew he'd test it, maybe even use it. But you also doctored the blend, just enough to trigger a reaction. Not fatal but disorienting. Something to stop him from talking. Then you made sure he'd wear that apron. No name, no tag, nothing to connect it to you. Eli shook his head slowly, almost pitifully. You've got no proof. Wolfe didn't blink. No. But Neil may recover, and when he does, he will name the last item he touched. And it will not be an accident. Eli stood. This is a setup. Marlene's voice, when it came, was soft. You were always afraid of him. Not physically, mentally. He was stronger than you where it mattered. Eli looked at her like he didn't recognize her. Then, with nothing else to say, he walked out of the room. Not a word. Just the hollow sound of footsteps over thick carpet. When the door closed, Goethe let out a breath. Marlene sat straighter. Wolfe looked at them, each in turn. Neil's collapse was not just sabotage, it was fear. Someone in your family has been rewriting the narrative for years. You should decide, now, whether silence is more comfortable than the truth. Marlene nodded slowly. I'll get the books. Do so, Wolfe said. We are not yet finished. And with that, he leaned back, eyes closing, fingers resting on his stomach, as if nothing more had occurred than a debate about mustard ratios. But I knew that look. He was waiting, not for evidence, not for confirmation, but for the final thread to twitch, so he could tie it off with a bow of perfect logic. The next morning, Wolfe called me into the office before I could finish my coffee. He hadn't even opened the Times yet, which was unusual and a bit unnerving. That usually meant his mind had finished its internal calculations and was ready to start laying out pieces in 3 dimensions. "Report," he said simply. I sat. Saul followed up. "The garam masala was signed out by Eli personally. And not just that batch, he's placed 5 off-ledger orders in the last 6 months. All in his name, all small enough to avoid notice, but expensive enough to raise eyebrows." Wolfe nodded slowly. "And the property expansion? I've got Lon Cohen pulling the registry filings, but Marlene was right. Eli's name is linked to a shell company that's bought 2 storefronts on their block, one of them next door to the deli. The other's an old bakery, empty." Wolfe didn't look surprised. "And the $10,000 payment?" Eli moved it through the deli account, labeled it community outreach. I confirmed with the supplier listed on the invoice they don't exist. Wolfe pressed his fingertips together. "Misdirection, not ambition. He's not building an empire, he's creating camouflage." "For what?" "To dissolve the deli without raising suspicion. Neil would have resisted. Marlene would have followed. So Eli had to disable Neil and discredit Marlene. But the apron, an act of theater," Wolfe said. "One designed to appear accidental, mystical even. Biblical notes, cryptic proverbs. It diverts scrutiny away from profit and toward paranoia." I leaned forward. "So what's the play now?" He looked at me. "We call in Inspector Kramer." That I didn't expect. "You think we're ready for that?" Wolfe's face didn't move. "By tonight Eli will have deleted everything he thinks can harm him. We will act before he has the chance." Kramer arrived just after 6, trailing the scent of a wet overcoat and perpetual irritation. He stood in the office with his arms crossed, looking at Wolfe like a man bracing for a headache. "Let's hear it," he grunted. Wolfe didn't stand. "Inspector, you will find that a man named Eli Fuchs attempted to incapacitate his brother through indirect chemical interference. The method, spice contamination, was untraceable by conventional means, but executed with specific intent to simulate illness." Kramer looked at me. "You letting him get theatrical again?" "Goodwin, wait for the finale," I said. Wolfe continued, unfazed. "The motive is layered. First, control. Eli Fuchs has funneled assets from the family business into private real estate projects. Second, silencing. His brother Neil discovered these discrepancies. Third, redirection, a fabricated aura of mystery. Notes, strange smells, biblical phrases intended to cloud the reality with symbolism." Kramer frowned. "So what's the charge?" "Attempted poisoning, forgery, fraud." "Wayne, that's a buffet." "Indeed." Kramer looked at me. "You got anything concrete?" I handed him a folder. Inside were the supplier confirmations, the altered invoices, the photo of the note Goethe found, and a side-by-side comparison of Eli's signature across multiple accounts. One was signed Fuchs on the spice order, another as manager on a delivery slip for the bakery property. "Your boy's been busy," Kramer muttered. "I'll need a formal witness." "You'll have 2, I said. "Marlene's coming back tonight with the ledgers. Goethe's already agreed to talk." "Good," he said. "Because if I'm going to walk into a delicatessen with a warrant, I need more than a spooky apron and a sermon." Wolfe made a quiet sound, halfway between satisfaction and fatigue. "You will have what you need, provided we act with speed." Kramer left with the folder and a promise to call by morning. Wolfe, for once, didn't insist on dinner in the dining room. He simply sat there, eyes on the fire, as if watching his mind tie off loose threads one by one. Later that evening, Marlene returned with the ledgers. She was calm, but I could see it in the way she carried her bag tight to the chest, like it held the bones of the family name. "I didn't want to believe it," she said. "But the numbers, he's been bleeding us dry for over a year." Wolfe looked up. "He relied on your trust. Your silence." "Not anymore." We scanned the records together. 3 transactions stood out. Labeled as equipment repairs, but routed through a third-party business address that matched one of the shell companies Lon had traced. "That's the bakery," I said. She nodded. "He told me it was going to be a spice annex," said Neil. "Approved it. And you didn't check." I wanted to believe him. I copied the entries for Kramer and filed the rest. Wolfe dismissed Marlene with a short nod. Not gratitude, not dismissal, just a mark of closure. As the brownstone fell into its late evening hush, Wolfe finally allowed himself the smallest indulgence. He removed the apron from its double-sealed bag and set it on a tray, 3 feet from his chair. He sniffed once, briefly, then leaned back. "Pomegranate rind," he murmured. "Come again?" "It's used to age certain masalas. It emits a sharp, tangy scent when exposed to metal. That is the source of the bitter note." "So it wasn't poisoned?" "No," he said. "But it was loaded, metaphorically, symbolically. Enough to trigger suspicion, nausea, even hallucination." Neil had a sensitivity. Eli knew. I stared at him. "He used spice like a scalpel." "Correct." Fritz brought in our coffee then, hands trembling slightly, as he set the tray down near Wolfe's elbow. He glanced at the apron and muttered something in German. I chose not to translate. "Will you burn it?" I asked. Wolfe shook his head. "No, it will remain as it is." "Evidence?" "No," he said. "Memory." Outside, the rain had started, slow and uncommitted. Inside, the brownstone settled into itself, as it always did when Wolfe had outmaneuvered the world again with nothing but breath and intellect. The phone rang at 10:42. It was Kramer. "He's in custody. Fraud, embezzlement, attempted poisoning." You were right. Neil was the only real obstacle. The apron spooked him more than it hurt him. "He's awake now, wants to talk." Wolfe offered a slow nod. "He will confirm what matters." "Thank you, Inspector." Kramer hung up without ceremony. Wolfe rose, unusual at that hour, and walked to the window. I followed. "Think he'll go quietly?" I asked. "He already has." "You think Neil will press charges?" Wolfe turned, his expression unreadable. "That is not my concern. But the family." He cut me off with a raised hand. "The family will survive, or it won't. Justice has been served. The rest belongs to appetite and forgiveness." I smirked. "That your final verdict?" "No," he said. "It's a fact." And with that he turned from the window, stepped toward the dining room, and muttered something to Fritz about garlic. I didn't catch the rest, but I knew the case was closed. I didn't sleep much that night. Something about the whole affair, it hung around, like the after-smell of overcooked cloves, faint and bitter in the corners of your mind. Wolfe had gone to bed before 11, which usually meant his engines had shut down, but I knew he'd lie awake, cataloging every angle again in that enormous head of his, dissecting motive, method, and meaning, until the solution turned itself inside out one last time just to be sure. At 8:15 the next morning, the doorbell rang. I was in the front room reading the Gazette and nursing my second cup of coffee. When I opened the door, Neil Fawkes stood on the stoop, pale but upright, wearing a gray coat that didn't quite fit his shoulders, and a look that said he'd been through something and wasn't quite done with it. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, voice hoarse. "That's me. I'd like to speak with Mr. Wolfe." I waved him in. "He's in the plant room. You get 5 minutes if you're lucky, and 10 if you bring flowers." I brought clarity. Neil said. I liked him instantly. Wolfe was watering his cattleyas when I ushered Neil into the room. He didn't look up. "Sit," Wolfe said. Neil sat. "You are no longer in danger," Wolfe said, still not looking at him. "Your brother has been taken into custody. Your sister, it appears, has retained control of the deli." Neil blinked slowly. "So it's over?" "No," Wolfe said. "It has shifted." Neil swallowed. "I didn't think it would go this far. I just wanted someone to notice." "They did," Wolfe replied. You noticed. And for that, you were punished." Neil let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it for days. "I saw the invoices. I saw the missing stock, the ledger padding. I asked Eli twice. He deflected. Then came the new blend. He told me it was a trial run, but I didn't order it. I smelled it too rich, too sharp, like it had something buried in it. I was going to call the supplier, but then it all went dark. You collapsed after exposure to a contaminated apron, Wolfe said, laced with over-oxidized pomegranate rind and trace amounts of fermented spice oils. Your body reacted strongly, not fatal, but strong enough to rob you of time. Neil nodded. He didn't want to kill me, just stop me. Correct. A permanent pause, a coma of convenience. And the note? Wolfe finally looked at him. He did not write it. That was Goethe. Neil blinked again. Goethe. She feared what she could not explain. She lacked your language, your clarity. So she used symbolism, a metaphor of bitterness. She hoped you would see it. I didn't, he said quietly. You weren't meant to. Not entirely. Neil looked down at his hands. So what happens now? You return to your post, Wolfe said. You supervise the books. You rebuild trust, and you choose whether to forgive your brother or not. That is your burden. Neil nodded once. He stood, slowly. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe waved a hand, already turning back to his orchids. Neil stopped at the door. One thing. The blend. The winter rub. I never wanted to change it. My father made that recipe. But Eli always said memory wasn't marketable. Wolfe didn't turn. He was correct. But he was also wrong. Neil smiled faintly. I'll remember that. After he left, I drifted back into the office. Wolfe was already settled with his beer and the morning paper, pretending the day hadn't started yet. You knew about Goethe? I asked. She left too early, the night of Neil's collapse. Avoided confrontation, but she placed the note deliberately, where only Marlene would find it. Why not come forward? She feared reprisal. Or perhaps she feared the truth. Most people do. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. It had started to snow lightly, just the beginning, soft flakes melting as they landed. The city bracing for another season. You think Neil will hold it together? I asked. He has structure, Wolfe said. He has pain, and he has purpose. That is enough. And Eli, in time, he will rationalize everything. That is his method. I turned. You never cared about the money trail, did you? Money is noise, Wolfe said. This was about silence, about who wanted it, and why. There it was. The philosophy. The moment of closure Wolfe always delivered, not as verdict but as observation. I waited, knowing there was one more note coming. Wolfe finished his beer, set it down, and looked at me. In the end, Mr. Goodwin, a spice is like a secret. Left too long, it becomes something else entirely. I grinned. You get that from a fortune cookie? He closed his eyes. From experience. Fritz called us in for lunch just then. Braised lamb, with garlic polenta, and a side of stewed greens. No masala in sight. The brownstone, as always, had returned to order. Quiet, steady, undisturbed. And just like that, the case of the apron that smelled like death became another file in the locked drawer of Wolfe's mind. Sealed, sorted, and already starting to fade. The days that followed were quiet, deceptively so. After a case like that, layered in betrayal, family debt, and the subtle art of silencing someone with spice, you'd expect some kind of aftershock. But life, especially in Wolfe's world, has a way of snapping back into place like a well-oiled trapdoor. Nothing creaked. No lingering footsteps. Just the distant hum of Manhattan doing what it does best. Forgetting things that don't bleed in public. Neil didn't call again. And Wolfe didn't ask about him. That's how Wolfe operates. When a matter is closed, it stays closed unless something dares try to rattle the hinges again. But I kept an eye on the papers. The deli stayed open. A modest article in the Gazette confirmed Eli had been formally charged with financial fraud and reckless endangerment. No mention of garam masala, proverbs, or weaponized aprons. Just numbers. People understand numbers. One afternoon, about a week later, I passed by Fuchs & Sons on the way to an appointment with Lily Rowan. The storefront was unchanged, but something in the air was different. The windows were cleaner. The chalkboard out front had a new message. Winter Rube back by demand. Tradition never spoils. I smiled. Inside, I saw Marlene behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back. Neil was next to her, restocking a spice shelf with surgical precision. Their eyes didn't meet often, but when they did, there was something between them that felt stitched back together, clumsy maybe, but solid. Goethe was at the register, quiet and calm, her eyes no longer darting like a rabbit in tall grass. I didn't go in. It wasn't my scene anymore. The story was no longer ours to finish. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office, digesting lunch and the Atlantic Monthly, which he only read when his stomach was calm and the world hadn't insulted his sense of logic in at least 48 hours. I passed by the deli, I said, dropping my coat on the rack. They seem balanced. That will change, Wolfe said without looking up. Balance never lasts. I sat down across from him. They're running the place together. The menu's intact. Marlene even brought back the holiday niches. Wolfe turned a page, unimpressed. You're not curious? No. You don't want to know if Neil will press charges. That is for Neil to decide. My interest concluded the moment he stood unaided. I folded my arms. You've got a peculiar sense of closure. Closure, he said, is not a requirement of truth, merely of drama. Still, I said, you solved it with nothing but scent, motive, and a woman quoting Ecclesiastes. Wolfe let the magazine rest in his lap. He looked at me for a long moment, not irritated, not smug, just present. Mr. Goodwin, he said, you misunderstand the nature of resolution. The apron was not the message. It was the silence that followed. What we solved was not a crime, but a sequence of evasions. Every member of that family knew a portion of the truth. None wanted the burden of the whole. I raised an eyebrow. Even Neil, especially Neil. He could have exposed Eli months ago, but he didn't. He chose delay over damage, until the delay became unbearable. And Marlene? She lived in the space between loyalty and suspicion. A place most families occupy, whether they admit it or not. And Goethe, Wolfe's face softened a fraction. She saw everything, but she had no language for it, so she spoke in metaphor, which almost got her ignored, which is why I listened. I let that sit for a moment. The radiator hissed in the corner. Outside, the snow was starting again. Soft, slow, no wind. The kind of fall that makes you think something old is being dusted off. You ever think about why people leave messages like that? I asked. Wolfe didn't answer right away. He reached for his beer, took a measured sip and set it down. They hope the truth will outlast their silence. They hope someone else will finish the sentence they were too afraid to write. That's poetic. It's human. I stood. Fred says he's trying a new variation on your lentil soup. He is wasting his time. Maybe. But it smells good. He looked mildly offended. Scent is not evidence of progress. I grinned. Tell that to the apron. He grunted and returned to his magazine. As I left the room, I paused at the door, hand on the frame. You know, it's not always about finding the villain. No, he said, without looking up. Sometimes it's about restoring the witness. That one stayed with me all evening. Stayed with me. Later, as the brownstone dimmed for the night, and Wolfe retired to his books, I found myself back in the front room, the fireplace low, my notebook out. I jotted a few things down, dates, quotes, a thought about how spices could hide secrets better than most people. I flipped back a few pages and reread an old entry from another case. Same pattern, different flavor, and I realized, not for the first time, that working for Wolfe wasn't about cracking cases, it was about understanding people who cracked themselves. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the house was silent, and somewhere, folded into the world's endless recipe of ambition and memory, Another apron was being tied. But this time it wasn't laced with fear. It was laced with forgiveness. And Wolfe, thank heaven, didn't smell a thing. The snow kept on into the night. Not fierce, not dramatic. Just a persistent, patient dusting. Manhattan had a way of looking almost innocent under snowfall, like a city trying on a memory. Inside the brownstone, the air had its own hush. Wolfe had retreated to his books in the upstairs library, a rare migration he made only when the world outside had offered him enough absurdity to merit philosophical retreat. That meant silence downstairs, except for the crackle of the fire and the occasional creak from the baseboard heating. I stayed in the office longer than usual. Cases that ended without blood always sat a little heavier. Maybe because the wounds were slower, more private. Eli hadn't pulled a trigger or swung a fist, but what he tried to do to his brother was still violence. It just wore a cleaner shirt. I found myself flipping through my notes, not to verify anything but to feel the shape of it again. It started with an apron, sure, but the thing that stuck was the silence. How deliberate it had been, the way each member of that family let the truth idle just long enough for someone else to catch it. Wolfe said once that most people don't lie outright. They curate, trim, reframe. The real trick is learning what they left out and why. The phone rang at just past 9. I was halfway through jotting a line Wolfe had said earlier. Closure is not a requirement of truth. When I picked up, "Goodwin," I said. The voice on the other end was low and familiar. "Marlene, I know it's late," she said, "but I wanted to thank you. You already did, in your way." The niche sign was very moving. She gave a small laugh. "That was Neil's idea, actually. Said if he couldn't confront Eli directly, he'd at least reclaim the recipe. How's he doing?" "Better. Quiet, but stronger. The ledgers are back in order." Goethe comes in early again without looking over her shoulder. "I think the place is healing." I let that sit. "There's one thing," she continued, voice shifting slightly. "I found another note. That snapped my spine straight." "Where?" "In a drawer beneath the cash register, stuffed behind old invoices. It wasn't dated, but I'm sure it's recent." "What does it say?" "It's short. Just one line. The recipe is never the problem. It's who forgets why it was written." I wrote it down as she spoke, already picturing Wolfe's eyebrows drawing inward. "You think it was Eli?" I asked. She paused. "No. I think it was from my mother." That gave me a second pause. "She hasn't spoken in months," I said. She hadn't. But lately, she's been humming, and she started writing again. Notes to herself. Reminders. This wasn't signed, but it's her phrasing. I'd bet on it. Has she said anything else? She said she knew. About Eli. About what he wanted to do to Neil. She said she was waiting for someone else to stop it. And she left a note. She said the food always remembers, even when people don't. I didn't have a follow-up to that. Neither did she. We said goodnight, and I hung up slowly. Wolfe was still upstairs, but I knew he was awake. I knocked on the doorframe to the library, and he didn't answer, which in Wolfe-ese meant I'm willing to hear this if it's worth my time. I stepped in. "Marlene found another note," I said. "This one might have come from the mother." He looked up from his chair. His eyes weren't sleepy. They were evaluating. "She believes her mother knew about Eli's actions and chose not to intervene. Seems so. Says she waited for someone else to see it." Wolfe exhaled once through his nose. Convenient, or resigned. He didn't respond. I gave him the quote. "The recipe is never the problem. It's who forgets why it was written." I watched his expression tighten, just a hair. "People treat recipes like formulas," he said. "But a true recipe is memory disguised as instruction. It is not meant to be altered without consequence." "So you believe it's hers?" "I believe it could be, but that doesn't clear her." "No," Wolfe said, "but it does humanize her." She abdicated responsibility, then passed the burden to the dish itself. I raised a brow. "You're saying she tried to confess through cooking?" "I'm saying she knew Eli was rewriting more than the menu. He was revising the meaning. And Neil resisted." Not the changes themselves, but the erosion of memory behind them. That was his protest, and the mother left the note as a way of validating that, or atoning for failing to protect it. It was Wolfe at his most reflective, which usually meant we were nearing the part where he tucked the whole story into a single folded thought, tied with philosophical twine. She believed the deli's history lived in its recipes, I said. So when Eli altered the blends, she saw it as something worse than theft. She saw it as erasure. I let that settle. Outside, the snowfall had stopped, but the streets hadn't woken up yet. Everything was still blanketed. Inside, Wolfe closed the book he'd been reading and set it aside. "You think the note changes anything?" I asked. "No, but it offers dimension. And dimension is the only difference between a crime and a tragedy." He stood rare at that hour and walked slowly toward the fireplace, looking not at the flames but above them, at the shelf lined with leather-bound volumes he rarely touched. "Will you write it in the report?" I asked. "No," he said. "Some notes are meant to be found, not catalogued." I nodded. "What about the apron?" "It will remain, as it was, in the cellar cabinet." I half laughed. "Next to the teacup from the Bradshaw case, and the broken vial from the Socorro incident." "Yes, you're building a museum of intentions, of misused intentions," he corrected. We stood there a moment longer before he turned and gave me a look that meant, "Go, rest." The storms passed. I went, but even as I reached my room and shrugged off the day, I kept thinking about that line. Who forgets why it was written? Maybe that was the whole case. Not about poisoning, not even about money, just about what happens when you stop remembering what you were trying to preserve in the first place. In the end, that's what Wolfe saved. Not a man, not a business, but the memory behind the recipe. And that was something worth keeping. The next morning, I found Wolfe already in the office. That in itself was unusual. He rarely made appearances downstairs before 10 unless something had clawed its way to the front of his thoughts and refused to wait for breakfast. He was seated in his chair, as always, a mug of beer untouched beside him, his gaze fixed on the small oak tray sitting on the corner of his desk. The tray held the apron, still folded, still sealed. "You planning on framing it?" I asked, dropping into my usual chair. Because I'd hate to see the Brownstones' first museum exhibit be a crime scene accessory. He didn't answer right away. That meant he wasn't ignoring me, just selecting his words with the precision of a man who never uses three where one will do. "The note," he said. "Marlene believes it was written by her mother." "Do you?" I thought about it. The phrasing matches. And she certainly had the vantage point, living above the deli, watching everything. She also had motive, Wolfe said. "Guilt." "You think she let it happen?" "No. I think she knew it would happen and chose to allow it. She believed the preservation of peace required a sacrifice." "Neil." Wolfe gave a slight incline of the head. "She trusted the problem to resolve itself. That is the most common form of cowardice." Nodded slowly. "You still think she wrote the note?" "Yes. But it doesn't change anything. It changes the color of the truth," he said. "But not the truth itself." I leaned back, hands behind my head. "You've got a whole palette going with this one. The more ordinary the crime," he said, "the more varied the justifications." We sat a while in silence, broken only by the distant clink of Fritz moving about in the kitchen. Wolfe didn't move, but I could tell his mind was still assembling the final shape of the case. Not to present, but to archive, to press between the pages of memory like one of his orchids flattened, but intact. At 11, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Inspector Kramer standing on the stoop, coat collar up against the wind, face like a man who'd chewed too many cigars without lighting one. "I came to return something," he said. I let him in. Wolfe didn't rise. Kramer pulled a small envelope from his coat. "Eli wrote something." From holding, he addressed it to you. Wolfe's eyebrow lifted, but he didn't extend a hand. I took the envelope, flipped it open. A single sheet of paper. Typed. Not Handwritten. Wolfe waited. I read it aloud. You were right. I didn't want to hurt him. I just didn't want him to stop me. The deli was dying. I was trying to save something. I forgot that not everything needs rescuing. Some things just need remembering. I looked up. Kramer shrugged. He's not fighting the charges, he said. Lawyer says he wants to take the deal. No trial. Wolfe closed his eyes. He seeks containment, not absolution. He won't get either, Kramer said. No, Wolfe agreed. But he may get quiet. Kramer turned to go, but paused at the door. You know, I thought this one would end in blood. Spices and poison. Hell, I thought I'd find a body. You did, Wolfe said. It simply got back up. Kramer gave a short grunt that might have been approval and left without another word, folded the letter and set it beside the apron on the tray. So now what? I asked. You going to lock both in the cellar like relics? No, Wolfe said. Only one of them. Which? The apron, he said. The letter I will keep. It is rare that guilt articulates itself so plainly. I looked down at it again. It wasn't long. It wasn't clever. But it was honest. In the way people get when the scaffolding has come down and there's nothing left to protect but a thought. I didn't know what Marlene would do with it. Or Neil. Or their mother, who in her silence had still managed to speak loud enough for Wolfe to hear her from 3 boroughs away. But I knew the deli would go on. People still needed pastrami and mustard, and that impossible winter rub memory would do the rest. That night, over lamb stew and pickled onions, Wolfe broke one of his own rules, and spoke at the table. It is a fragile thing, he said, to inherit tradition from people who themselves were imperfect. The temptation is always to revise, but revision is not always improvement. Sometimes it's erasure. He took a sip of beer, wiped his mouth, and looked at me. You may write that down. Already done, I said. He gave a small grunt and returned to his plate. Later, while I was clearing my notes into the filing drawer, I paused with the last page in my hand. Wolfe had written a single word across the top in block letters. Intention. No date. No names. Just that. I filed it under F for Cox, beneath 2 other cases that also started with families and ended with something heavier than justice. Then I poured myself a scotch, sat by the fire, and let the silence take me. Outside, the snow had melted. Inside, the apron remained, but the air was clean again. By the following Tuesday, life in the brownstone had resumed its familiar choreography. Wolfe returned to his orchids with the reverence of a man nursing a cathedral. Fritz, newly confident after Wolfe's uncharacteristic compliment on the lentil soup, began experimenting again with preserved lemon. And I, while I was catching up on accounts, sorting mail, and watching the quiet come back like a cat returning after rain. The apron, now sealed and boxed, had been stored away in the locked cabinet downstairs. The same cabinet where Wolfe kept relics from past matters. Not trophies. Wolfe didn't believe in trophies, but he did believe in artifacts of human intention, particularly the ones that didn't shout. Around midday, Marlene stopped by. No call, just rang the bell like a woman who finally knew she wouldn't be turned away. She wore a dark navy coat and had a jar tucked under her arm, a blend homemade. I could smell it before she spoke. This is for Mr. Wolfe, she said. Tell him it's the original recipe, my father's, no revisions. I took it with a nod and invited her in, but she shook her head. I don't want to sit in that office again, she said. Once was enough. Fair. She'd left part of her silence in that room, and some silences don't need a return trip. He'll appreciate it, I said, even if he pretends otherwise. She smiled, faintly. Tell him I found one last note. In the apartment, in a recipe box. Your mother's, she nodded. Written on the back of a cake card. It just said, remember what you're feeding. I didn't write it down. I didn't need to. After she left, I brought the jar into the office and placed it gently on Wolfe's desk. He was mid-paragraph in a monograph on soil pH variation in Central America and didn't acknowledge it right away. But he saw it. Of course he did. His eyes flicked to the label, neatly handwritten, no flair, and then back to his page. He wouldn't open it today. Maybe not tomorrow. But he would open it, and when he did, he'd know exactly how much of that blend was memory and how much was forgiveness. We didn't talk about the Fuchs case after that. Wolfe never reopened files unless required by subpoena or philosophical obligation, and this one didn't meet either. But I found myself thinking about it more than usual, not the mechanics of it. Spice, ledgers, fake, invoices, betrayal, but the tempo, the way it all unfolded. Quiet, steady, inevitable, like watching a slow leak in a hull and knowing the ship won't sink suddenly, but it will sink. Later that week, Saul Panza stopped by. He'd just wrapped a job involving a piano teacher with a second set of keys and a third identity. He handed me a report with the usual Saul neatness and precision, then asked, "You finished that delicatessen matter?" "Closed," I said, "mostly intact." He raised an eyebrow. "Mostly? Some things were saved, others were repurposed." He shrugged. "That's better than usual." We shared a coffee in the front room. Saul had questions, but not the kind that needed answers. He just liked to feel the shape of a case, even after the door had closed. When he left, I went back to my desk and skimmed through the last few entries I'd made in the file. Then I wrote one more, in pencil, under Wolfe's final word, intention. The crime was subtle, the motive was layered, but the harm was plain. A family that mistook silence for safety. It took the scent of memory to bring them back to the same table. I closed the file. That evening, Wolfe and I ate in the dining room. Duck confit and braised endive. Halfway through, Wolfe set his fork down and looked at me with that expression he uses when he's about to say something that sounds casual but is anything but. "Do you recall the Morenstein case?" he asked. Vaguely. "Pickled beets in a counterfeit will." "Yes." "And the sister? She falsified the signature to protect her brother's shame." "I remember." He paused, just long enough to make me wonder if that was the whole thought. It wasn't. She did not regret the forgery, only that she had to do it. And I believe Marlene feels the same way. About keeping the deli. About stepping forward. She didn't ask for permission. I said, "She just decided to stop disappearing." Wolfe nodded. Most justice begins there, with a refusal to vanish. We finished the meal in silence. The next day brought a warm wind, unusual for the season. The last of the snow melted from the railing outside. Wolfe had the windows cracked open in the plant room, and for a moment, the whole house smelled faintly of earth and cloves. I stood in the hallway and listened. Not for anything in particular, just the shape of the quiet. It was a good quiet, earned, still tinged with the trace of a story that had unspooled, not with gunshots or scandal, but with something slower and older, the fear of being forgot, the danger of forgetting. Wolfe, from the office, called my name. "Yes, sir." "Close the file," he said, "and have Fritz prepare roast chicken tonight. Special occasion." "No," he said, "but I find myself in the mood for something honest." I didn't say anything, just turned toward the kitchen, smiling. Sometimes in Wolfe's world, that was as close as you got to closure. And sometimes it was more than enough. It was a quiet Sunday, when the final knot tied itself, not in the usual way, no door-slamming confessions, no frantic phone calls, no new evidence dropped on the stoop like a flaming bag, just a letter, thin, unassuming, addressed to Wolfe in clean block letters with no return address. Fritz found it in the morning mail, wedged between a seed catalog and a wine merchant's flyer. He set it on Wolfe's desk, with his usual discretion. Wolfe didn't touch it until mid-afternoon. He had already pruned 6 cattleyas and dictated 2 letters to the Vermont Orchid House before settling at his desk with his beer. Then, with a sigh that meant very well, he opened it. I watched from my chair, the way I always do when Wolfe's about to extract the soul of something from paper. He read the letter once. Then again, when he looked up, his expression was still, but not blank. There was thought there, measured, careful, final. "It's from Mrs. Fuchs," he said. "The mother?" He handed it to me. The handwriting inside didn't tremble, though it was clearly written by someone who had lived too long in the quiet. I knew. I always knew. I taught them to cook but not how to forgive. That was my failure. Neil wanted to preserve. Eli wanted to transform. I let them sharpen that difference until it cut them both. If silence is a crime, then I am guilty. I offer only this. I remember. I always remembered. I folded it and held it for a moment before sliding it back across the desk. "You going to keep it?" "No," Wolfe said. "It will be returned to Marlene. It belongs with the blend. The one she brought. The original. Unmodified. Her father's." I nodded. "You think she'll understand what the letter means?" "She already does. That is why she left the jar without asking for anything in return." He leaned back and closed his eyes. "The matter is concluded. And the lesson." He opened one eye, regarding me like a chess piece he'd already positioned. That family's fracture, not from malice but from misremembering what bound them in the first place. I gave a short laugh. Very quotable. "You want me to write that down?" "No," he said. "I want you to cook with it." That made me blink. "Excuse me? I've asked Fritz to let you prepare the roast tonight, using Marlene's blend. You want me to cook?" Wolfe's lips twitched. "Call it restitution. You've absorbed enough theory. Let us test execution." I groaned, but stood. "And if I fail?" "You won't," he said simply. I headed toward the kitchen, the letter still faintly pressing against my palm, the scent of cloves and paprika already rising from the unopened jar. As I passed the hall mirror, I caught my reflection, half smirk, half curious, not unlike the look Wolfe gave crime scenes. And for once the case didn't feel like a puzzle or a file or even a solved story. It felt like something planted, waiting. Dinner was served just after 7. Wolfe tasted one bite, paused and said only, "Acceptable." From him. That was nearly ecstasy. The snow outside had melted. The brownstone was warm. And somewhere in the city, a deli stayed open. The blend unchanged. That was justice enough. That